SpaceWar.
That's right. And originally, SpaceWar was frowned upon to run SpaceWar because it was time change. You could run it any time, but it was frowned upon to do during the daytime. But then, as the power of the PDP-6 was PDP-10 was added, and it was basically the same instruction set but faster, and the two machines were fused together into a asymmetric SMP system. And then there was more compute power, and all of a sudden it was very common to be seeing people playing SpaceWar in the middle of the day. And there were 6 III displays. Any of those could run SpaceWar.
So now we have SpaceWar as an underground project on a giant brain. How did it get on into the arcades?
So I had brought Hugh Tuck up there. This is Hugh Tuck here. We'd gone to high school together, and I brought Hugh and his brothers up to the AI lab on a number of occasions because it was just a cool place to go. And one of the things we did there was play SpaceWar. And one big mistake that Hugh made was one night he said, wow, if we could make a coin-operated version of this, we could get rich. We could make a lot of money. And that was 1967 or 68. But I never forgot that Hugh had said that. And in 1971, DEC introduced the PDP-11 computer, which was a mini computer. And it could be purchased for around $12,000 for a rather basic unit. So I went back to Hugh then in early 71 and said, Hugh, if you still want to build a coin-operated version of SpaceWar, we can now do it. And Hugh talked it over with his brothers and sisters and everything, and I fairly shortly thereafter came back and said, yeah, let's do it. So we ordered a PDP-11 and started the process of building the first version of SpaceWar.
So when did it get working? And
so the machine was delivered in May of 71, and it was installed at Stanford in September of 71. So there was a PDP-11 computer. It had an extended arithmetic unit in it, which would do multiplies and divides, which at the time I thought was required to do gravity calculations. I now think I could have just used a table lookup and saved pre-calculated it all, stored it in the table, and saved Hugh $3,500, but money was of no object, so it really doesn't matter anyway. So the extended arithmetic unit was $3,500 extra to do multiplies and divides. And the main memory on it that came with the system was 8K of core memory. That was $3,000. And 8K bytes of memory. So some of you don't even probably realize that memory came in such small increments. And then there was the display, which was very simple in the first version. It was, DEC had a device called a DR11A, which was basically interfaced to their main system bus, the unibus, and it would give you 16 bits of input-output. And so on the output side, there were 2 of these. One was X and Y, and it just ran the DACs, the digital analog converters. And so all of the drawing was done by the CPU. It was literally loading these numbers in the X and Y register. And then you'd wait for the beam to settle, because the DACs are pretty noisy. When it got a little bit, when it started to settle enough, it would then intensify for something like 200 or 300 nanoseconds. It was always very dim. One of the reasons was the analog was so poor. And I'll take blame for that. But then again, maybe it was analog devices. I hooked it up the way they said they should. In any case, you had to keep the beam the intensifier fairly short, because if you left it on long, you would go across the part where the beam was still moving all over the place. And so the displays were always fairly dim.
Yeah, the early displays of that vintage had all sorts of problems with hitting 60 cycles in the air. And so if you did the display very short, you didn't get too much 60 cycles moving around.
Another problem is the displays we were using were Hewlett-Packard displays, and they were basically very large oscilloscope tubes. And they used electrostatic deflection rather than electromagnetic. Electromagnetic, you've got a big coil, and it focuses the beam, whereas with electrostatic, the beam goes through two capacitance plates in this direction and in that direction for the X and Y deflection, and it literally pulls the beam. But in the process of steering the beam, it's also taking that beam of electrons and spreading them apart further, so you don't get a sharp focus. However, the advantage of that is it's much harder to burn a hole in the phosphor.
Yes. So you installed it in the student union?
So in September of '71, we installed it. Can I back up a little bit? I have
Sure.
to tell something else too. In a month before we installed it, we got a phone call from Nolan Bushnell. Nolan Bushnell and Hugh and I, we had all pretty much we're building a coin-operated version of the same game, but we had very different strategies for doing it. Nolan was building a machine that could be manufactured for under $1,000 and could be sold to the operators of pinball machines. And I was determined to build a very faithful representation of Steve's game. And it's probably true that I was more concerned about the other people at the AI lab that I knew who would see this and their reaction to the game than to making money. To me, it was important to bring out the game in its fullness. But Nolan heard through some mutual friends that Hugh and I were building the game, and he wanted to warn us, and he also knew we were using a PDP-11, so he knew that our cost would be very substantial, and he was trying to warn us that, hey guys, you better look out, because I'm building this game and it's going to be selling for much less than yours. So Hugh and I, did you go with me over to Nolan's? I can't remember if you did. Okay, so I went over to Nutting Associates and met Nolan, and when I went in there, I remember he was back in the lab and he was standing next to that mummy-shaped computer space, and he had an oscilloscope in his hand and he was working on the circuitry. And I was always, at that point in time, I was always impressed with anybody that knew how to use an oscilloscope.
It's a great prop. You can twiddle the knobs while you're trying to figure out what to do next.
I was impressed. And his game was playable, and I did play it. I was very impressed that he could build something with a manufacturing cost of under $1,000, but I was unimpressed with the fact that it wasn't anything